Battle of Azeroth World of Warcraft game director discusses expansions. ANAHEIM, Calif. Blizzard Entertainment announced this morning at its BlizzCon fan event that the latest expansion to the popular massively multiplayer RPG World of Warcraft will be Battle for Azeroth. How World of Warcraft helped shape how we play. This is an all-out fight between the Alliance and the Horde, Warcraft's two factions, which grudgingly cooperated during the previous expansion, Legion. We recently spoke with WoW game director Ion Watcher Hazacosta about the pain and process of developing a new expansion for a 13-year-old game with 7 previous chapters. What's changed about the way one expansion leads to the next? We have increasingly in recent years tried to link those stories together into a larger meta-narrative in a way I don't think the game was able to do as successfully in its earlier years. Expansions like Burning Crusade vs. Wrath of the Lich King vs. Cataclysm felt very disjointed. They stood alone. It was dealing with this villain, this threat to the world, and then a totally new threat arises. In recent years, we've tried to weave threads that tied one expansion into the next, whether it was the fall of Garrosh at the end of Mists of Pandaria, that led to his escape to Draenor, that set those events in motion, or Gul'dan escaping to our world and doing the bidding of the Legion, or who knows what we'll see at the end of Legion. What was WoW like when the game launched? I think early on, World of Warcraft was at its core a simple game. It was open-ended, it was questing, it was dungeons, there were some raids at the end of the day. There was a PvP structure that came into place after launch. There weren't that many ways to play the game. Everyone had to level up, and that was a long journey. It took a long time to get to max level. The very best gear was available to the raiders and the raiders alone, and then there were other types of gameplay available for those who wanted to dabble. How has that changed over previous expansions? In many ways, players drove and influenced the development of the game from that point onward. Gameplay styles emerged. Increasingly, we are thinking of those groups of players and their motivations when we craft any new piece of content, whether it's a patch or an expansion. We're thinking about the person who is a serial alcoholic. We're thinking about the person who is the collector. We're thinking about the person who primarily cares about lore in this story and wants to experience that in all of its detail. And of course, the high-end hardcore raider, the competitive pffer, and so forth. There are now dozens of ways to play World of Warcraft. Different areas of interest among those players are often in direct opposition to each other. Weaving this tapestry that tries to make all the people happy all the time, even when they sometimes want directly opposing things, is a great challenge. So how do you craft an expansion with those different playstyles in mind? I think it's recognizing that we want to give something to everybody. We want there to be content for all playstyles. It's not realistic for a production perspective to say, if you brought one cookie, you have to bring enough for the whole class. Not everyone can get everything for us to release something. At the same time, it's also not always the best thing for players in terms of pacing of that content. We've done a lot more than ever before to stagger and release different updates and different pieces of content, even aside from patches, at a rate that best suits the audience for that content, rather than clumping it all together. I think it's just about breaking up, trying to add depth to the game in all these different areas, whether it's micro-holidays, whether it's collection goals, whether it's dungeons, raids, PvP, world quests, lore, etc., to make sure we're really ticking off all those boxes and building a cohesive world and a cohesive experience, but releasing the content at a rate that keeps it a steady stream and keeps it in players' hands as they're ready for it. Do you worry that the move to more content over time will reduce the impact of a boxed expansion? It's hard to say for sure. There are some players who approach this like a single-player game, and they're going to come and go, and that's not going to change. But it's hard to see how it can't be better for the bulk of the player base to have more to do, to be more connected, to be more entertained by the world, to have more goals, more updates, and to let us flesh out the world that we're building each expansion with more depth and more breadth. That really is what marks a new expansion, as much as a new level cap and a very clear catch-up moment.